You are now watching Zach Lesage, the best place to learn about competitive Pokemon TCG. Let's get it! Yo, what's poppin' YouTube? Welcome back to the channel, Zach Lesage here. Today we are going to be changing things up. Now normally on Mondays we do the top 10 deck lists, and that's something that I want to change up for a while now because that structure made things incredibly stale, especially the top decks are always at the top. It was nobody's guess, it was always Mew, you know what I'm saying? It's one of those things where I decided to change things up and now it's going to be Metagame Mondays. So sometimes that is going to include top deck lists, sometimes it is going to include event coverage. In this case we're going to be covering over the European International Championships that happened this past weekend. And that event was an absolute banger. I mean, luckily me, I'm friends with both Gustavo and Frank, so to be friends, I got to see two of my friends both try to become the 2022, it's been a while, international champion for Europe, and Gustavo won back-to-back, and shout out to Frank for one heck of a run with Whimsicott. We're going to be really talking about the metagame here, so if you want to learn more about Pokemon, you're in the right place. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and let me know in the comments what you think about this type of video. I'd really appreciate some feedback. Also, just let's chat it up there. It really helps the YouTube algorithm. But yeah, let's dive into some things. So starting things off, we saw that Rapid Strike Urshifu VMAX won the whole event. That's something that I didn't think a lot of players would necessarily see coming. This new kind of take on Rapid Strike Urshifu VMAX can be traced back to Robin Schul's winning Liverpool run. Limitless Urshifu is what the deck called, and you want to know what, it didn't really take off online events for a while. Over the past couple of weeks we saw a few key player groups and stuff like that play around with it. But the goal of this deck is to offer a lot of opportunities to either be like a Dark Toolbox deck or a Rapid Strike Urshifu deck where you can spread out of nowhere, or you could use Gale Thrust against these fighting weak matchups, and it just seems to have a really like kind of robust matchup spread. I know that it's difficult to play, and it's difficult to play in the metagame, but a few top groups played it. There was Isaiah Bradner and Rahul Reddy's group that played it to quite success, and we saw both Isaiah Bradner and Justin Bokhari make top 8. The Limitless group brought it as well, where we saw Pedro and Tord Reklev both pilot that deck to a top 4 and top 8 finish respectively. And we also saw Gustavo Wada bring this to EUIC, and the other group that brought it was Zach Cooper and Caleb Rogerson winning the seniors division. So we had these handful of diverse Pokemon TCG groups of top players bringing this deck to the event, and it makes you wonder why. They didn't necessarily collaborate as far as I'm concerned. I know the Limitless group, I know I talked to Pedro, I casted a GG tour with them a while back, and he was saying that they very much like that deck still. So what makes this deck work? I think the ability to be both fighting and dark type has a large factor when it comes to making this deck good. It's no surprise to anyone that Mew and Arceus Inteleon decks have been kind of tearing it up, and you have the fighting type aspect for the Arceus decks. You have this Baby Galarian Moltres, and you can almost play your deck like a single prize card deck in order to kind of trick your opponent into going for that Malevolent Charge, Fiery Wrath, or force them into knockouts that they don't really want to take, but they kind of have to take. And that's one of those things where it makes this deck incredibly skill-based, and Galarian Moltres does do a lot for the deck, including just being basic energies and an additional attacker, and can be useful against different matchups overall. So it's one of those things where Galarian Moltres is just absolutely amazing. We see it in a lot of the top decks. We see it in Arc Inteleon decks. We see it in these Dark Toolbox decks. I see a lot of, like, anytime anyone's experimenting with a spicy deck, it's likely including this or a Galarian Moltres V to try to solve the format. And that's what makes these decks incredibly skill-based. A lot of the skill behind this deck has to do with the Shady Dealings engine, because this deck plays Drizzile and Inteleon. You can search out multiple trainer cards per turn and just figuring out exactly what you're looking for and planning these turns multiple moves in advance, because it's one of those things where you gotta understand Mew does not really play any kind of shuffle draw supporters. Most stock lists are running Elsa and Boss's orders. That means that for a list like Mew, if they don't play Marnie or Judge or anything else like that, you could just build up your hand turns in advance and just be able to kind of chain that Clara and go Galarian Moltres and make that all happen. So a lot of it has to come with the foresight and understanding exactly what you're doing with Shady Dealings, which makes it an incredibly difficult deck to play. But for most of us, we've been playing with Inteleon based engines for a while now, which does make it easier to transition into than some others. I don't know, it's interesting. That being said, I think we should look at Gustavo Wada's winning list, and we'll talk about that for a little bit. where Gustavo elevated this deck from the Liverpool version is really where I think he saw his success. So comparing it to the Liverpool version, this one went just for Shady Dealings and Teleon and was very precise with, I guess, the G-Max rapid flow damage, whereas you see that there was a split between the Shady Dealings and the quick shooting for the Limitless build. I mean, the Limitless build also played Peonia so that you were able to kind of search through your prize cards if there's anything that was prize, but it also focused more on the Rapid Strike Urshifu line and the Galarian Moltres, instead where the Limitless version only played one Galarian Moltres, and this one also played the V as well, which can be very helpful against the Mew matchup, because one simple Raihan from that Moltres allows you to kind of jump back into the game, get a knockout out of nowhere. Other consistency cards added to the deck would be Crobats. Avery seemed to be pretty good in the metagame overall. A lot of top decks kind of came to the conclusion of playing this card just to really limit benches. Benches got very big over the past couple weeks, and I guess Avery just like really kind of harnesses that energy and is the reverse of that. And you can see that the supporter line, while it's still a little bit funky with the one Research, one Boss, one Cheryl, one Raihan, one Sonya, one Piers, one Clar, with Avery being the main source, it's more concise than the Limitless build that played Zinnias and Cynthias and Birdkeeper and all that kind of stuff. Like, there's kind of like less one-ofs. The energy line also seems pretty normal for a deck like this. I think Limitless got that one correct, but it's one of those things where this list looks like more of a simplified version of what they played at Liverpool. Gustavo had his ideas straight across, and it's one of those things too where we don't necessarily know if Gustavo got it right. I don't necessarily know who Gustavo tests with, but it is something to note that when there's major groups that made it, because again, Gustavo brought it to EUIC, Limitless brought it to EUIC. We also had the Isaiah Bradner, Rahul Reddy group, Justin Bokhari group bring it to EUIC, and we had the Zach Cooper, Caleb Rogerson group. That's at least four major groups that I can count of that played that deck. And if I'm missing one, my apologies by all means. Just for information purposes, it's worthwhile to look and see exactly where there's aspects that you might like out of those decks, because all of these players are going to play towards the playtesting style of their group and their deck building of this group. So while Gustavo did win, maybe Gustavo would make changes to their deck afterwards. I know the tournaments that I've seen success in, I've definitely changed my decks out afterwards a little bit, but it is one of those things where it's worthwhile to note. But here's Gustavo's list. Again, in the description, I will be putting a link to all of the top 8 deck lists from the Limitless website, so check that out. And of course, we have more information to go off of too. This is just Gustavo's deck. We're in a whole video, everyone, and it's the new format. And again, let me know in the comments if you like this format, if there's anything you would change up. Totally love to hear a little bit more about it. It wouldn't be a crazy weekend if that was the end of the video. We're only part of the way there. The second place deck that Frank Perchik ran was way different than most people were expecting. Probably really different than most players were expecting. Frank played Whimsicott VSTAR. Whimsicott VSTAR started making a bit of a mark on the metagame a couple weeks ago. I covered on my channel because I saw a lot of it happen locally. I know that Cyrus Davis was playing it at the 1K that I was running at the upper hands. There was another player in our area, Thomas Harvey, that kind of introduced them to that deck, or introduced this archetype as far as I'm concerned. And I even remember reading about Whimsicott VSTAR as far back as Robin Schulz putting it high in their like kind of top cards coming out in Brilliant Stars. Needless to say, this card's all about its Trick Wind attack, and whenever you're stopping your opponent from doing things, players are going to flock to that, or at least it's some idea to build around it. So this deck really focused on using Trick Wind, turn after turn after turn after turn, and using cards to really stop your opponents. Crushing Hammers, Path to the Peak, Fan of Waves, things like that, and that really brought Frank Perchik all the way from, well, I mean, to making it to day 2, all the way to an international champion finalist, which is absolutely amazing. Fluffball Star is nothing to scoff at either. I think Fluffball Star is one of those secret kind of attacks that you're never really expecting, but when you already have a Psychic Energy and a double Turbo Energy, that's 3 energies minus the 20, so there's 160 damage if you have 3, and if you add another double Turbo Energy, you could add on another 100 damage. Like, you could just really get a lot of damage out there really quickly. And it's not absurd to just like beam off an Arceus V off the bench, or knock out a Rapid Strike Urshifu in the active, or anything else like that. Whimsicott VSTAR really has a lot going on, and it's really interesting to see how far this deck brought itself. Like when I saw that those few players were doing well, I'm like, okay, maybe they ran into some inexperienced players, because in my experience I find that Whimsicott is a deck that's much better going first. If you go second it can be very difficult, but they did make some changes to the list. As you can see, Whimsicott VSTAR does have a lot of those cards that we were talking about, the Crushing Hammer, Fan of Waves, Path to the Peak, and of course you're going to be using Trick Wind over and over and using the barrel as that way to use Industrial and Scissors, keep on replenishing your hands. I did see that Frank and their group added Crobat V to the deck, and that worked out pretty well. Avery is a card that they added to the deck. I guess that's going to reduce the bench size. We can see that there's kind of a theme. The fact that both finalists played Avery, and that's not a card that I've necessarily been adding to my list. Maybe we should start adding Avery to our list, or at least question a little bit why Avery is so good. And again, like, Avery is going to be limiting your opponent's bench, so having big benches gives your opponent a lot of options, and maybe between limiting their bench and then going with Fluffball Star, it can be absolutely a fantastic move. Peony allows you to directly grab a lot of cards out of this deck, and then you can go for barrel, so I think that's a really cute inclusion in this deck. Even though you have to pitch your hand, this deck doesn't necessarily have a lot of resources going on. You're going to burn important cards like Crushing Hammer, so you could grab that Fan of Waves and that double turbo energy. It does allow you that way to grab cards that you just otherwise wouldn't grab from this deck. I think the biggest inclusion in this deck is probably experience share. So after one of your Pokemon did get knocked out, you are able to move that energy and kind of make it a little bit easier to get the next one popping back off. So overall, that's what makes Whimsicott VSTAR very good in this metagame. And it's one of those things where maybe this was a surprise deck and the surprise is gone and players are going to tech around it. And we'll get over like where the metagame is going to be going forward in a little bit. That's also something that we're going to be including in these kind of videos. But it is one of those things where Whimsicott VSTAR against an unexpected opponent is definitely going to do a lot better than when players definitely expect some kind of control. Control definitely tries to sneak in the shadows and then creep up on the metagame. So it's one of those things, we'll have to see how this deck performs, especially going into Indianapolis Regionals, Bilbao and Joinville Regionals all coming up in about 2 weeks time. But of course, I'm going to keep everyone up to date with all of that. So while Whimsicott's cool and all and took a spot in the top 8 and made finals, and we had 5 Rapid Strike Urshifu decks make top 8, which is absolutely wild, more than anything I think anyone would have ever imagined, there were other decks that made top 8, and we'll start off with the most popular deck, and that deck is Mew VMAX. Mew VMAX having the option to use Cross Fusion Strike, being able to copy any attack, and I mean, a lot of the attacks that you think you're copying are going to be Technoblast, but when you have access to Oricorio and Melodious Echo, and even Psychic Leap, Mew VMAX has layers of depth that most players overlook because they think that this deck is just getting OHKOs on the first turn, and while it does do that, it's one of those things where Mew VMAX is largely one of the most difficult, if not the most difficult decks to play utmost correctly all the time. Its spot in the top 8 is not surprising. I think most players would have definitely expected maybe even more Mew to make top cut, but there were a lot of successful players playing Mew at the event, including my pal and testing partner Gabriel Smart. I know that they ended day 1 7-1-1, brought it all the way, didn't necessarily have the greatest day 2, but there's a lot of great names, even like local players that are absolutely amazing. Andre Cheason. I could go on with the whole list, and when Limitless puts it all there, they will be updating with all those deck lists, or at least I assume they're going to be updating with all those deck lists. It is one of those things where Mew VMAX was loud and clear that it was there at EUIC. Moving into the top 8 deck list to see what it looks like, we'll show you exactly what the deck looks like. This is the Mew list that ended up making top 8 with Mateus Rizanek. My apologies if I butcher that name. I've only read it, but it's one of those things. Mew VMAX looking absolutely amazing here. I do see that they played the 4-2 Mew. That's something that I've really started liking with Mew VMAX lists. With a 4-3 Mew, I find most of the time I'm using an Ultra Ball or a Quick Ball to discard that extra Mew. Once you have only 2 Mews out, that's all you need for the game, because if your opponent knocks those out, you're done. They're gone. And it's one of those things, even if you have a Mew prized, or let's say you have to discard a Mew early, which you just try not to when it comes to this list, you have access to Melodious Echo and Glistening Droplets, even Psychic Leap, which is strong against a lot of these decks. You got to be using Psychic Leap against Malamar decks, and you have to be using Psychic Leap against these Rapid Strike decks so that the Galarian Moltres doesn't really get you. So there's a lot of things that Psychic Leap is very important. Regardless, we see that there's a Pumpkaboo in the deck, which is kind of hot. Pumpkaboo is going to be using its Pumpkin Pit ability to try to get around Path to the Peak, so that's really where their third stadium is. They do play a Scoop Up Net as well, which I think is cute. I don't know if I'd necessarily, it's kind of a wastable card on a Meloetta or something else like that. and I guess it's a good way to get it out of the bench or like out of play in general. So it's kind of like a force stadium in a lot of ways, and a kind of a half retreating card. I think it's cute. I don't hate it. One choice belt, one tool jammer. I do see players playing around with that kind of concept, and maybe the tool jammer is good to get around big charms, or just getting around like their choice belts or anything else like that. So tool jammer can be a hot pick as well. Going in with a one basic psychic energy I think is also really hot, and it's something that I do want to bring up with Mew VMAX. We just saw Whimsicott make second at the internationals. If you don't have your Whimsicotts now, good idea to pick them up online and on in real life. So go to Atlas, go to PTCGO Store. I have all those links to the description with the discounts. Pick them up now before they are sold out everywhere, because when new decks do well, I'm sure Rapid Strikes and Whimsicotts are absolutely soaring through the roof right now as we talk, because everyone wants to have them before their next event. The Psychic Energy is hot because it is going to give you an option around that Whimsicott deck, so at least you have an energy that you could attach, because you can't attach any special energies and stuff like that with the Whimsicott Trick Wind attack. So this Mew VMAX deck, I think, is absolutely built towards the metagame. I'd like to see a training court here instead of maybe the scoop of nets, but it is one of those things where we'll have to talk about that a little bit. There's still more for us to cover at this event. That's 7 out of the 8 spots that we had at our international championships at Frankfurt. There's still 1 spot remaining, and it's something that I would have never expected more than the Whimsicott deck, more than Rapid Strike taking 5 spots. It's Sylveon VMAX. So Sylveon VMAX has been a deck since it came out in Evolving Skies, and back in the Evolving Skies format, Max Harmony was a little bit more effective as an attack, and then we got Mew VMAX, and basically that just basically was the best psychic deck that we had in formats. Sylveon VMAX is all about doing all those different type Pokemon on your bench, and I mean, the player that made top 8, Ty, has been completely playing it online and seeing success with it this whole time, basically keeping, like, being out open, honest about their deck choice, and then they took it all the way. It's really one of those cases where if you are a player that specializes in the deck, even if there's content creators like myself or top players that are just going to say, no, it's probably not as competitive, there's Sylveon VMAX crushing it out. This version of the deck played Rapid Strike Urshifu VMAX, again, another Rapid Strike Urshifu VMAX. I guess we could say 6 Rapid Strike Urshifu VMAXs in the top 8s. Crobat VMAX, Octillery, Galarian Moltres. You can see that there's a lot of cards that were played across the board, and there was Peonia and Avery. I mean, Avery was featured in so many of the top 8 deck lists, and Peonia and all these weird cards. Change it up a little bit, you know what I'm saying? The stock 4 Research, 3 Marnie doesn't necessarily have to be cookie cutter, even though my list might be cookie cutter when it comes to making a content. That's for me as a player, and maybe it's something that I need to experiment and grow with. It's one of those things where I thought that was really cool. Path of the Peak in the deck, I mean, this deck was absolutely wild, and we could talk about it all day, but let's look at the deck. As you can see, it's all over the place, but you're going to be using that Max Harmony attack based off the amount of Pokemon that you have in play. And I mean, as much as it's a Sylveon deck, it's equally a Crobat VMAX deck and equally a Rapid Strike Urshifu VMAX deck. I mean, I guess Arceus is really the most played card in this deck because it's not a 2-1 line, it's a 2-2 line, or it's more of an Octillery deck than a Sylveon deck. You know what I'm saying? It's interesting, but that's what you get when you have a player that's put and devoted enough time when it comes to playing this deck. And I wouldn't necessarily recommend this deck unless you are fully devoted to playing a deck like this. Maybe the Sylveon VMAX is just strong against these Rapid Strike decks. It's something that is required to test, and it's out of left field. I mean, there's a lot of things for me as a deck builder. I'm not really a big fan of the 3-battle VIP pass. If there's any mathematicians or any insane deck builders out there, I'd love to know the difference between the odds of starting and playing a Battle VIP pass on your first turn with 3 copies versus 4 copies. And I mean, I think I'm going to probably end up just playing 4 copies if I were to play the deck. But regardless, really interesting lineup of energies and really interesting lineup of everything going on in this deck. And it just shows that there's like a unique presence in the game still. I think it flipped everything that we thought we knew about the game over the past couple weeks, and then it's new now. The game's almost refreshed going into Indie. And if you asked me what my play was, my play a week ago would have been Mew, and one of my other top plays would have been Arceus Lycanroc. Now it's different. Maybe I have to consider the Sylveon deck. Do I even own Sylveons? These are the questions that I'm really asking myself. And we also got to add, like, we saw what was in the top 8s. There's also a lack thereof of decks that weren't in the top 8s. And that's something that I also want to discuss. It's really easy to look and see the decks that saw success, but what about the decks that weren't necessarily there? And I think there was there was 2 big glaring omissions from decks that a lot of players were expecting at EUIC. Namely, Arceus VSTAR is a card that I didn't really see a lot. We only saw the one Sylveon Arceus deck, but I know that Arceus Inteleon, with it winning Sao Paulo Regionals and it being one of, if not the top played decks online, really not showing its presence at all. And I think that some of the Limitless group played it. I believe Robin Schulz played Arceus Inteleon. Could be wrong. We'll see exactly what the final list and what everyone kind of played at some point. But it is one of those things where Arceus VSTAR was not really to be found at the top tables, and we'll see more of the picture once the top 16 is released. I think a lot of players, this deck probably got preyed on by those Rapid Strike Urshifu decks that a lot of top groups played, and that's something to definitely factor in if you are an Arceus VSTAR player. I would definitely look into including at least a copy of Dunsparce in your deck. Its Mysterious Nest ability is going to get around that Rapid Strike Urshifu weakness and at least other weaknesses, because I know that I've been piloting Arceus Lycanroc. I know that Little Dark Fury has been piloting Arceus Lycanroc. I know that a lot of players have played Sandaconda, Galarian Zapdos, just a bunch of different random fighting cards, and Dunsparce seems absolutely necessary. Another card that I'd add into the deck is Manaphy. I definitely add Manaphy into the deck. I think it's one of those things where you got to watch out for Rapid Strike, GMAX Rapid Flow, absolutely destroying your build and maybe knocking out an Arceus in the back, a Sobble on the bench, and just gobbling things up. I think Rapid Strike is going to absolutely soar as we go forward into the metagame, and Manaphy seems good in a lot of decks. So if you are trying to play Arceus Inteleon, I would definitely try to include a Manaphy. Now, there was one other deck that didn't really see a lot of success, or at least the big deck that I was going to think that was going to see a lot more success and didn't, and that deck was Malamar. Malamar saw a lot of success at Liverpool Regionals, and I know that Liverpool is, I thought it would directly inspire a lot of players for Frankfurt Internationals, but Malamar didn't seem to really be anywhere, and if it was, it probably got gobbled up by really strong Mew players and Rapid Strike players. I know this deck's Psychic type, and a lot of people are going to be like, Psychic type beats Rapid Strike for sure, but GMAX Rapid Flow says, I'm knocking out your active Malamar and your bench Inkay, and that's it. You have nothing, you have no attack, and if you don't have Manaphy, again, this is another deck that would probably see a lot of success, or a little bit more success if it played Manaphy. I don't even know if this deck could fit Manaphy for what it's worth, but if you are considering Malamar, you might want to consider Manaphy, or maybe just not consider Malamar going forward with the amount of Rapid Strike Urshifu that we're seeing in play. Really interesting choice overall, but I do think that Malamar is one of those it's one of those decks that just wasn't necessarily loud and clear. Again, we're going to be looking for the Play Limitless kind of take on it, or the Limitless TCG top 64 decks or day 2 decks that are going to be added up onto the website. So stay tuned for all that, and maybe we'll see a bigger picture, but right now it did not really see like Malamar had much of a presence at this event, or not a lot of top table presence at this event. So we already know that we want to add Manaphy to some of our decks, and Dunsparce is probably good. There is one other thing that I do think is worthwhile to add to some decks. Maybe not all decks, but it is something that could be cool in some decks. And it's to really counter Whimsicott, and that would be basic energy cards. This is really a way to get around the Whimsicott VSTARs, because it's not just going to be the Rapid Strike Urshifu VMAX show, and as much as that card's going to spike in play, or at least likely spike in play because a lot of players want to play around with it, I do think that you want to be adding basics like energy deck or cards into like your Mew deck, or into some of your other decks. So think about adding extra energy into your deck and extra basic energies into your deck, because Fan of Waves is definitely going to be difficult, Crushing Hammer is going to be difficult, and Trick Wind on Whimsicott VSTAR is going to be difficult to deal with. So those are the 3 cards. The Manaphy, the Dunsparce, and basic psychic energies are going to be wanting to be added into your list going forward, and I'm going to be reflecting my lists as we approach that going forward. It's one of those things that I think is just necessary. In terms of decks to play, I think that the metagame is a little bit shaken up right now, and I don't necessarily want to be recommending any deck over another. I think it's worthwhile to be checking out Rapid Strike Urshifu VMAX. It's worthwhile to invest and test out Whimsicott VSTAR. I think that Mew VMAX is as strong as ever, and maybe Sylveon's much better than all of us thought. I've always kind of written it off as some kind of rogue deck, or maybe not as competitive as other decks, but it is something to check out. I think Arceus Inteleon can use another look. Maybe it's better if you play Dunsparce, Clara, and Manaphy, and maybe an extra energy here or there. I think right now what I'm going to be doing is just testing out the format myself. I'm still a firm believer in Mew VMAX, and I think that's probably my top choice, because I think it's very good at kind of going through the metagame. So maybe a Mew VMAX deck with 2 psychic energies, Training Court, and some kind of answer to the Galarian Moltres, or at least I need to playtest that matchup a little bit more, would be a great choice. Maybe Whimsicott's just a really great option. I saw that a lot of players were playing it. Connor Finton, another top player, played it with Shadow Rider Calyrex VMAX. I think these are all worthwhile things to test. So I think our metagame's open. Look at the list that we have available from EUIC, and we'll see what's going on at the late night series later on tonight. I think that's really going to be our first step in the right direction as we go forward. Probably not a lot of players from Frankfurt are going to be playing in that event, but it is worthwhile to see exactly what is going on with the metagame and how the global metagame is reacting to EUIC. I hope that you all enjoyed this video. I know it's a little bit of a different take and not necessarily a top 5 decks, but it did allow me to talk about the metagame in a way that I felt comfortable with, and I'm really excited to bring this kind of video to you. If you hated it, don't give it a dislike. Just let me know in the comments. I totally love some feedback. I'm going to work on my editing style when it comes down to it a little bit more, but I do appreciate everyone for watching it through. I will have some kind of sponsor videos towards the end, so check those out. It would be great if you could pick up some coaching or pick up some codes from PTCGO Store or pick up some TCG singles from Atlas TCG. That does help support me as a content creator big time. But otherwise, I appreciate every single person who's been sticking through. I mean, I've been struggling a lot lately between mental health and I had food poisoning, and then I'm recovering over some kind of sinus infection. It's been a past like 3 weeks on top of just being as busy as I ever have been, but I'm finally like catching my breath right now, chilling, recording with this matcha frappuccino, and we're gonna be everything's going great soon. I will be going to Indianapolis regionals, so if anyone is there and they do want to come up and say hi to me, by all means you're welcome. I'm definitely someone who loves to talk to our community, and if you haven't got a chance to get to know me in person yet, I'd love to get a chance to get to know you as a person as well. So feel free to introduce yourself to me at that event, and again, stay tuned for a great week of content both here and at the Shuffle Squad from me. So I'll catch up with everyone later. Have a great one. Peace out, and have a great day. Check out PTCGO.com, the best place to get Pokemon TCG online codes. There's a lot of selection available, and I have a discount code available for the website as well. You could pick up any kind of cards, just going up here. You could add them to your cart in any quantity that you need to get the cards that you need. And you can go to the discount code right over here, and you can put in code ZLesage5 to save 5% on your next order of codes. Are you trying to get better at Pokemon TCG? Well, if you are, you're in the right place. I offer coaching at metafy.gg/@ZachLesage. That link is in the description, and you can pick up a coaching session from me and book it on the website. I likely have availability this week, and you can see exactly what my availability calendar is at any given time. I offer training plans to help players get ready for any of their upcoming events, including getting all the way to the World Championships, or you can pick up a one-on-one coaching session from me and learn the game at your own pace. I offer a variety of opportunities for players to get better at the game, and it's one of those things where there's a lot of players who I've turned into regional, international, and even a world champion along the way. If there's anything that shows, I have an FAQ on the website, so by all means, check it out and get better today. I'd love to help you on your Pokemon journey and be absolutely amazing to see your growth. I truly appreciate you taking the time out of your day to watch this video. It means the world to me. And my goal with this channel is to spread my love of the game and knowledge with our entire Pokemon TCG community. If you haven't already, help signal boost this video to other Pokemon TCG fans by liking it, sharing it with your friends, and subscribing to the channel. Hopefully we reach our goals really soon. Check out this recommended video, and have yourself a great day. Thanks.